And as I talked about in the previous weeks, I had a special interview coming up this episode, in fact, with Achilleas Sirigos of Greece, who is the author of a book called Chronicles from the Future. This book is an interesting book in that it is a recounted, it's a diary of sorts that has been reworded for today's audience, because initially the book was written in a foreign language, transcribed by a Grecian student of the linguistic arts, and when he transcribed this diary of a colleague of his, or more especially his mentor, essentially, he realized that it wasn't a science fiction tale, it was a diary. The diary recounts an amazing tale of a man who slept in a coma for a year, and while in a coma, he was in the future, and living in the future, and conversing with people, and living there as somebody else, like a consciousness slip. They apparently traded places. And when this happened, there were revelations made to him in the future, not specifically about his time, because that would be very awkward to come back in time and to know your fate, but things that happened later on after his death were revealed to him. And in these, it's very interesting because the book itself, while you're reading it, you can see these things are happening, and that's what's kind of interesting. So the original book was written in the 20s. That's a diary. It was released in 1972 during right after the Grecian dictatorship was overthrown, and nobody wanted to read this book. And it was called The Valley of Roses. So we had a good conversation about this on several of the esoteric secret rooms within Facebook. And people were really interested, and I was taking chunks of the original text and trying to translate them using Google Translate, and some amazing things were going on there. Very interesting and mind-blowing revelations. But why is it Masonic per se, right? Well, it's a little bit esoteric in the sense that the things that go on in this book and what he learns in the future about the future of mankind and living up to our abilities. But it also is interesting that it's called the Valley of Roses, right? So there's a little bit of a Rosicrucianism twist on some things in this original text, and that were rewritten for today's audience to understand it in English through a new edition. The book was again released as the Valley of Roses in like 1979, and again didn't get anywhere. And at that point, I guess the book was held as a manuscript per se, or the diary was held by a Masonic Lodge. And Masonry isn't as open all around the world as it is here in the United States. So for a lodge to hold something, they had good reason to. Perhaps the Greek Orthodox Church wouldn't like it because it contained prophetic visions or statements. And so there was all this controversy about it. And Achilleas Sirigos got a hold of the original book given to him by his brother, and he went to the book's publisher owner kind of people and asked, hey, can I do this? And they said, it's about time somebody took it on. So he did it. And if you had been reading any of the excerpts which were published on ancientorigins.net, again, very interesting. They put it together in almost a graphic novel type style, but it's just a taste of the whole book. So the new version is called Chronicles from the Future. And again, this is not Achilleas Sirigos' adaptation or reinterpretation or rewriting. He's just writing it for today's audience so that we can understand it easier. He has not added anything or taken anything away. He has edited for length. There are some things, very brief things omitted, which I'm sure he's taken very careful considerations toward those. And I should mention that who is this Achilleas Sirigos guy? Is he credible? Well, yeah, he is. He's a very credible news reporter in Greece. He's edited thousands of articles. He's written over 2,000 articles. He is a mainstay on the Grecian TV news networks and things like that. So he is a very great guy. He was so cool to do our show. And so without any further delay, I'd like to just turn on the interview. You guys can sit back, enjoy it, and let your imaginations go for a little ride. And when the interview is over, we can ask ourselves some interesting questions. Here we go. All right, everybody, if you're joining us right now, we have the pleasure of talking with Achilleas Sirigos, who is the author of Chronicles from the Future, A True Story. The article was originally published on ancientorigins.net. The title is Chronicles from the Future, A True Story Kept Hidden by the Masons, Now Revealed. And the initial article was published, and it had an incredible interest behind it, and then later on, excerpts of the finished product, is what I'm assuming it is, actually came out on Ancient Origins, and there will be a full-blown book coming out. Achilleas has been a journalist for 20 years. He is in Greece, and he's been an editor for books. He's written over 2,000 articles. He works for TV stations out there. So we're really happy to have him on the show and to take some time out of his busy schedule to hop on here and talk with us. So Achilleas, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Robert, for the invitation.
So, of course, for people who might not know what this story is about, initially, I guess a brief description of the story is that this guy who has an affliction where he has sleeping sickness, he falls asleep, he goes into a coma for months at a time, and he wakes up, and then he falls asleep, and for 1 year he's asleep, and he's living in the year 3906. And he's in the body of somebody else, and there's all these prophetic things that they can tell him, but they won't tell him things that happen in his immediate time. And he wakes up and he writes all this down. Can you fill in a little bit more for us?
Okay, first I have to say that I'm not the author of this diary.
Right.
I'm just the editor.
Right.
The author is the man that you described, Paul Dienach, which was a Swiss-Austrian teacher with a very fragile health. He was the man that fell in a coma for a whole year, and when he recovered from his coma, without saying anything to nobody, because all his relatives and most of his friends were dead, he just started writing what he had experienced. Then, because of his fragile health, he came to Greece. He came to Greece because of the climate, and there he started to have some lessons as a teacher, teaching young Greeks German. After a year, his health deteriorated. He had to leave for for Italy, for Sicily.
Okay.
And he left to one of his students a briefcase full of notes. The student was George Papahadzis, a later professor of philosophy and a very distinct man. When he started translating his teacher's notes, he realized what he had in his hand. That's a brief, let's say, introduction into this amazing diary.
So as he puts these kind of papers together, he's starting to realize that this isn't some work of fiction. These are his notes from a time where he was in the future.
Yes. First of all, we have to say that Dienach suffered from encephalitis lethargica. This is a strange neurological disease that develops an immune system response to overloaded neurons. So the first time that Dienach fell into a lethargic sleep, it was for 15 minutes. The second time, it was for a whole year.
Wow.
In a period during which he was kept in a bed in a Swiss hospital. So this whole year that he was in a coma, there was a conscious slide, as he refers to it, and as the man in the future said to him, a conscious slide, and his conscious was traveled through space and time and was inside the body of another man who just recovered from coma when Dienach's conscious was inside his body. So we have a conscious of a man of the 1920s inside the body of a man in 3906. And he very vividly describes the first time he saw his face in a mirror after he thought he recovered in the Swiss hospital, but he was not in the Swiss hospital, he was in the future.
Right.
And he saw his face on the mirror. He was totally terrified. He had a nervous breakdown. And then the doctors in the future realized his peculiar situation and told him that what he was experiencing was a conscious slide. It says in his diary that they had experienced in the future just one more time this incident, this strange medical incident, but they know about that.
Interesting.
When he recovered from his coma back in the 1920s, Dienach never told anybody about his situation because he thought that everybody would thought that he's crazy or a lunatic. We have to understand that we are talking about the 20s. In Europe, it was a more conservative style of life than we experience today, where everything can be heard and everything has an audience. So he just knowing that he didn't have much years to live because he was suffering also from tuberculosis, he started writing what he remembered from the diary that he kept the whole year that he was in the future. And the brief story of this diary is that the people in the future who understood his situation told him about the historical events that took place in the mankind, mostly after the 20th century till the 39th, and also traveled him across Europe, the Europe of that time, and tried to make him acquainted with the way that the people live in that era.
So a quick question I guess I would have is, originally when I first read the initial text that appeared on Ancient Origins, I was fascinated by it because I'm fascinated by science fiction, and that's what this sounds like, just something totally crazy. So I started researching it, and I found, a couple copies of the book here and there, very expensive, and the book itself, I would find excerpts, and I would just throw them into Google Translate because it's in Greek, and I was reading all this amazing stuff about colonization on Mars, and all kinds of amazing things that are going on, these prophecies and things that he received in the future, and he comes back and he makes these prophetic statements about great cataclysms on Mars and things that happened here on Earth and all kinds of amazing other things. What are some of the amazing other prophecies that happened in the story, without giving too much away?
No, it's not a problem. It's not a novel that we will try to hide the end or the content. The main purpose of publishing this book and translate it into English so that everybody can read it is that I consider it a human a human legacy, a legacy for mankind. Independent of what you think of how this book, which was not intended to be a book, it's a diary, and it is read like a diary, and it was written like a diary. So depending on what you think about what Dienach experienced, this book for me is either prophetic, it's either historical, if you believe that there was a conscious light and the man really lived for a year in the future. So what he describes, it's history for the future, for us the future. Or it's something really out of this planet. Because a man of his studies, of his knowledge, of his status, could never write such a thing. The details and the things that this book incorporates are amazing. And let's talk about colonization. It says that there will be a colonization of Mars after the year 2100, which if you, and this was written back in the 20s, if you read now what NASA says about colonization of Mars, you see that they put the time limit after 2080.
Right.
So it's pretty close. It says that this colony, the only human colony out of Earth, will thrive for many years, but it will be totally destroyed from a meteorite rain, which will destroy every person that lives on the colony, over 20 million humans. And it says that this will be the only and one effort that humanity did to colonize any planet out of Earth. It says about our era, which he describes as an era towards globalization, but it won't be a global and a peaceful globalization, a peaceful globalization. It says that the main problem that humanity will have to face during the years that we live in the 21st century is the fear of the number, as he says it. And when he says number, he talks about overpopulation.
Right.
And immigration. Does that ring any bell?
Right, yeah, absolutely.
It says that people have lost the time and the ability to solve a problem which comes from these amazing numbers. If you see all the progress nations of the world, like USA, Canada, Europe, have a population that doesn't rise a lot. If you see the percentage of kids that a European family has, it's not more than 1.5, 1.4.
Sure.
If you see all the other nations that of the third world and nations that copy serious problem with their economy, and not only that, with civil rights and everything. If you see how these nations thrive through their population, you see that this is something that you can't expect this to stay in the future. This is a major problem,
right.
Because most of these people that have no hope, where do they are trying to go? To USA, Europe, and this is a problem. If you try to inflict, let's say, and say that there is a universal law that says that nobody can have more than 2 kids, there will be a revolution for almost from every religion in the world.
Right.
So we have a problem that comes to us, we have a problem that is there in the book, and it says it will cause the next world war, and many little wars in nations, in Europe, outside Europe, in the next 100 and 150 years. It says also about, and this is what is the, let's say, the hopeful sign of the book, and what I really love. It says about how humans will have their evolution, and they will turn to the next stage, from Homo sapiens to Homo occidentalis novus, with many basic differences in their anatomic centers in their brains. And this will happen after 1,000 years, so we have a lot of time till that. But there is hope out there. There is also turbulence. There's also bad things. But what really this diary has inside, it's hope. And I feel that we need hope. And we need hope for this mankind, for the future. And if you see all the science fiction books, they're all talking about doomsday in a way or another.
Right.
And this is a book that talks about real hope in the future.
Let me ask you about the title. The original title was The Valley of Roses. Where does that come from?
The Valley of the Roses is a place in southern Europe where most of the wise men of the world go in order to find peace and have most of the time for their work. It is the place where the transformation from Homo sapiens to Homo occidentalis novus occurs for the first time. So it's a title that was chosen by the translator, George Papahagis, because, as I told you, this is not a book, this is a diary, so it has no title.
Sure.
That's why I choose Chronicles from the Future, because it's not the title of the book, it's the title of the content.
Sure. And that's something to remember to the readers and to the listeners here, is that this is a diary, and when I was going through, if you want to check out some of the excerpts on ancientorigins.net, you will see the diary entries along with some pictures and things. One of the things that's just incredible is Paul's tribulation, I guess, with his love life. It's heart-wrenching. He falls in love with a girl, but she marries another guy, and she passes away, but never without, she always loves Paul, and
yes, it's the start of this diary is the start of a typical diary. You find personal things, personal thoughts, love thoughts, and that's why George Papahagis, when he gradually translated Dienach's notes with his not so perfect German, because the original text was in German, he did it over a period of 14 years, from 1926 to 1940, mostly in his spare time. And at the beginning, he thought that this was a novel, because it starts like a kind of novel.
Right.
But then after translating a lot of pages, and after coming to the core of the text, he realized that this was not a novel. This was a diary from the future. And when he finished the translation, it was during World War II, and the original manuscripts was confiscated by the Greek army, who had an invasion in his house and saw the German manuscripts during the war and thought that this was something of the enemy. So the original text from Papahagis, the original notes from his teacher, was confiscated by the Greek army. So Papahagis, after completing the translation, he gave it to some of his friends, Masons, Theosophists, professors of theology, and also 2 anti-Nazi Germans. After all of these men read this book, everybody realized what they had in their hands. But the diary was kept within a close philosophical circle, and in the Tectonic Lodge in which he was a member, because Papahagis was also a member of Tectonic Lodge in Athens. The book was taken very seriously by the Masons, who did not want the information to spread to a larger circle, because the text was very difficult, and that's why I edited this book and made it easier for the modern reader to read it.
Yeah, just a quick note there. You did a great job with that, because I've read some of the just straight Greek to English translations, and you have to read it a few times to understand it, especially going from Greek to English and then understanding the language. And you did a great job there.
And this was the reason that the book, when it was published in Greece back in 1972 and in 1979, had no success, and also the church protested against the book because the book says something about the end of the religions, or a global religion, or something like that, or that the reality, as they call it in the future, the summit, is much bigger than everybody nowadays thinks. It's bigger than one religion. It's bigger than everything we can imagine. That's what they say. So this was kept as a secret knowledge, as a very important text inside the Tectonic Lodge, inside the close philosophical circle, because Papachadis was also the later president of the Greek Philosophic Society. And after strong disputes, Papachadis decided to publish the diary. As I told you, it was during the period that Greece entered the hardest phase of the dictatorship back in 1972. Right. There were strong protests from certain church circles who considered the book to be heretic, and also the fall of the dictatorship a year later practically condemned the first edition to oblivion, because no one was interested in the future when the present was so violent. So all these factors, along with the difficult language and the rough style of Dienach notes, made the diary even more difficult to understand. So when my brother gave me the book, and I really gave a big effort to fully understand it. It took me a period of more than 2 years to analyze the book, to find the extracts that was really precious with the information from the future. I understood that this had to be edited in order that everybody can understand the essence of this book. And that's what I did, not cutting things that was essential. I tried to be really faithful to the style that Dienach wrote, but with an adaptation to 2015.
Yeah, you did a great job, and like I said, anybody who's really interested in this book, and you can just go to ancientorigins.net, and you can just search, in the search query future, and you'll see Chronicles of the Future, and if you scroll down, you'll see these excerpts with some pictures and things like that to kind of guide you along. And the excerpt itself is long enough to just pull you in right away.
Yes,
so,
yes.
The illustrations that you have there, are those in the book as well?
And they won't be in the book. We did it just for the site as an attempt to really have an image of those periods, both from the period from the future and also the period back in the 1920s. And maybe in the future, after the ebook edition, we'll have a graphic novel after, this needs a lot of work.
Sure.
So this is a basis for a graphic novel, let's say.
Yeah, I mean, it's a phenomenal story. The philosophy behind it is just incredible. And when we think about when you ask a modern person of our generation, the ideal situation of the future, and they tell us that things are peaceful and we're not fighting over religion, and we've risen above all of these minor things in people's lives, we find that this is almost this utopian idea that Paul Dienach finds in the future. What ends up happening, he takes over a body of somebody who also was in a coma, so it's like they almost...
He takes over a body of Andreas Northam, a physicist of that time, who had a car accident. So when Dienach's conscious slides in the body of Andreas Northam recovers, but with the conscious of Dienach. And after a year, when Dienach returns to his original body, in the future, Andreas Northam dies.
Really?
Yes.
Just intense. So
yes.
Let me ask you, since you found a diary, or you grabbed the book, your brother, you said earlier that your brother had bought the book and given it to you, and the book had been published in 79 and 71, or was it 78?
It was 72, 79, and the third time was 2001, when I had the book. And after reading the book, I reached the publisher of the book, which is Radamanthis Anastasakis, a Greek publisher, who was also a member in the Tectonic Lodge, just like Papachadis, and got the copy of that book from the Masons.
Very interesting.
When I told him what I wanted to do with the book, he told me that it was about time. that somebody did that because nobody had, had the time or the courage to do this work. And I'm not praising my work, but it was a work that had to be done. So he said that I completely agree with you. We have to do that. This is a part of the whole mankind, not only for the Greeks to understand it and the Greeks that put an effort to read the original book.
Sure.
And so that's why we are talking this moment.
So let me ask you, from the moment you grabbed the book and you started reading it, did you initially, like when you finished it the first time, what were your thoughts on it? Do you think that it was possible? Did you think it was a true story? Did you think it was a work of fiction? What were your thoughts?
My thoughts were and still are that this book, or part of this book, is true. Part of this book is or are the memoirs of someone who lived in the future in this strange way. And the translator of the original text, who knew Dienach personally, because I never met Dienach. Dienach died back in 1924. So the only link with Dienach and us is the translator Papahadis. And his belief was that the inspiration in writing of this text wasn't an imaginary creation of Dienach, based on his education and his insightful abilities. And the original translator thought that it was a true phenomenon of parapsychology that was linked to his life. Maybe he had also added a couple of things. Maybe he didn't see or live all of these events so vividly as he described. But he believed that the basic elements of his text are true experiences. And this was also the comments of two professors that wrote the book originally and the anti-Nazi German officers that also read them back in the 40s. So for me, it's like a gem. I don't know if it's a sapphire or a diamond, exactly the type of gem that I have in my hand that I'm reading. But I know that after reading this book, I was feeling better inside me. I had a hope for the future, as if you see a movie with a happy end.
Right.
But this movie is about our planet, our mankind, and the happy end is about the future. So I keep my truth about this book, and whoever will read this book will find his own truth. But I don't think that there could be somebody that reads this book and find it indifferent or doesn't find some things that will really appeal to him.
So what do you think, what can we all learn from the story? Like, if we just read the book, what do you think our big takeaway is outside of the fact that humankind will go on?
I think we have to keep the essence of our characters. I think we have to understand that the core of the human soul is based on good and not on evil. This is like a superficial thing that I'm saying, but it's not. It's something that I think is the problem of the way we live today. We really like things to be good around us, and things aren't. We would really like to change things, but sometimes we can't. When they describe our times and our century in the future, they consider it part of the medieval era. And that says something about us.
Right.
They say that people in our era were miserable because they couldn't fulfill their core to live peacefully, to live creatively, to live free, to live without dogmas, to live without weapons of mass destruction, to live without the fear of extinction, and all the things that our mankind suffers today.
Very, very interesting. Just an incredible story. Achilleas Sirigos, I just can't thank you enough for coming on the show today to talk about this incredible work that you've put so much work into to make it available for everybody today. And let me ask, when is the book going to come out? When can we get the full book?
I think we'll be ready till the end of this month, till the end of September.
Okay.
The book will be available on Amazon as an ebook.
Very cool. And will it be available for print copy also?
Yes, we will also be able to do that. I think from the beginning, but maybe 1 or 2 weeks later.
Very cool, very cool. Again, thanks so much for coming on. And for anybody listening, we will have links to Achilleas Sirigos' post on ancientorigins.net. We'll have links to the book as soon as it's up. We'll put the link in the bookstore so you guys can check it out. And again, Achilleas, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Robert, for the opportunity.
All right, a fantastic interview. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I really hope that you pick up that book. You know, we are releasing this at a great time because that book is like right on the cusp of being released. So I hope you guys check it out. We'll have the links to the bookstore and everything else just as soon as it is available. And I'll have a link to the original article on ancientorigins.net in the show notes. Again, it was amazing to have Mr. Achilleas Sirigos on the program, and our thanks for taking the time to get on the program all the way from Greece. And we coordinated just right. It was 9 a.m. my time and 5 p.m. his, and we just had a good time. So thanks again for listening to that interview, and I hope you found it intriguing.